Now, let me tell you a story that's been sitting heavy on my heart for near 40 years. It was my grandmother who first told it to me. Back when I was young enough to believe the world was fair and good folks always got their reward. This tale happened in Wyoming territory. October of 1882, when the West was still wild enough to break your heart and hard enough to remake it stronger. It's about Grace Thornton, a woman I came to know in her final years, and Wade Morgan, the drifter who saw her true worth when the whole town had written her off. You see, back in those days, a woman with a permanent limp and no husband might as well have been invisible. But sometimes, just sometimes, the good Lord puts two broken people together and makes them whole. The hollow thud of that trunk hitting the dirt lord. I can still hear it like it was yesterday. Grace Thornton stood there on the boarding house steps, gripping her walking stick so tight her knuckles looked like bare bone in winter. You have to understand, Mrs. Hartley's boarding house was the last decent place in Willow Creek that would take a crippled widow. 6 months' rent paid in advance hadn't meant a hill of beans when Mrs. Hartley decided Grace was bad for business. "Finally got shed of her," Mrs. Hartley announced to a young couple come to see the room. Her voice carried clear across that dusty street, loud as Sunday church bells. "Couldn't even wring out the washing proper anymore. Just dead weight, taking up space a working body could use." Dead weight. Now, I need you to know how those words landed on Grace. Like stones in her stomach. She told me years later. Like the final nail in a coffin she'd been building since the wagon accident took her Thomas and crushed her left leg 3 years back. The October wind had teeth that day, cutting right through her patched calico dress, the blue one with flowers so faded you had to squint to see them. She shifted her weight to her good leg, though good was a mighty generous word for it. The bad one, well, it sent fire from hip to ankle with every breath, but she stood straight as pride would let her. Mrs. Hartley kept on talking, telling those potential tenants how Christian charity had its limits, how a body had to be practical in hard times. The young couple peered through the window at Grace like she was some curiosity in a traveling show. 70 cents. That's all Grace had left in that little drawstring purse her mother had made her. 70 cents between her and winter starvation. Every other boarding house in Willow Creek had already said no. Too slow for kitchen work. Too weak for laundry. And teaching. Well, the school board made it clear that a widow without a man's authority behind her couldn't maintain proper discipline. Now, this is where Wade Morgan comes into the picture, though neither of them knew the Lord was working his plan that day. Wade sat his horse at the town trough, dusty as August drought and twice as worn. I reckon he had maybe $7 in his pocket and a past he didn't care to talk about. His coat had more patches than original cloth, and his eyes gray as old dishwater. Grace always said had that 1,000-mile stare of a man who'd been looking at horizons so long he'd forgotten what home looked like. "Ma'am?" His voice was rough as sandpaper, but gentle-like, the way you'd talk to a spooked horse. Grace turned. And there's something you need to understand about that moment. She was expecting pity, or worse, the kind of improper suggestions desperate women heard too often. But Wade's eyes held something different. Recognition, maybe. Like one hurt creature seeing another. "That your trunk." He nodded toward her earthly possessions, scattered on them steps like remnants of a life. "I can manage." The words came out sharp enough to cut glass. 3 years of managing had worn her pride down to a nub, but that nub was all she had left. Wade studied her for a spell, then turned to his horse, checking the cinch real careful-like. That mare didn't need checking, any fool could see that, but it gave him reason to stay. "Horse needs water anyway," he said, casual as discussing weather. "Might as well load up while she drinks." He didn't wait for permission, just led that mare to the trough and started lifting Grace's things. Now, here's what struck Grace. What she told me made all the difference. He handled her possessions like they mattered, not tossing them up quick to be done with it, but placing each piece deliberate and secure. When he picked up her small wooden box, the one with her late husband Thomas's initials, T.J.T., carved in the lid, he paused. Inside were her teaching supplies, chalk worn down to nubs, a slate with a crack down the middle she'd mended with paste, and Thomas's primer from when he was a boy. "This goes someplace special?" Wade asked. The question near about broke her composure. Most folks wouldn't have noticed it was anything but a plain pine box. But Wade recognized something precious when he saw it, even if he didn't know what or why. "Inside, if you please. Away from weather." He nodded and wedged it safe between two bundles, using his old horse blanket to cushion it. That's when Grace noticed his hands proper scarred from rope work, one finger crooked from a break that hadn't set right, nails worn down to nothing. Working hands. Honest hands. The kind that knew what it meant to earn every penny. "Wade Morgan," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Been doing ranch work up north of here, heading south before the snow flies." She didn't offer her name, figured he'd already heard it from Mrs. Hartley's caterwauling. Instead, she asked the question that mattered. Why? Why what? Why help me? Wade finished securing a rope, taking his sweet time with the knot. When he finally looked at her straight on, she saw something in those dishwater eyes that made her chest tight. "Reckon I've been loading my own possessions onto horses more times than I care to count. I know what it feels like when folks watch you do it." And there it was, not pity, not charity, but understanding. One soul recognizing another's hurt because they'd walked that same lonesome road. Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The wagon wheel caught another rut, jerking Grace sideways hard enough to make her bite through her bottom lip. Copper taste filled her mouth. Wade Morgan hadn't spoken for going on an hour now, just clicked his tongue at the mare when she slowed. The sun was dropping fast behind them, stretching their shadow long and thin across the buffalo grass. He pulled off the trail near a bend where cottonwoods made a windbreak. The creek ran low but clear, October drought having shrunk it to half its spring width. Wade unhitched the mare, movements quick and practiced, like his hands knew the work without his mind needing to guide them. Grace eased herself down from the wagon before he could offer help. Her bad leg buckled soon as it touched ground. She caught herself on the wagon wheel, bark dust and axle grease coating her palm. Wade glanced over but kept working the harness, giving her the dignity of struggling unwatched. "I can gather wood," she said, already reaching for her stick. "Plenty of deadfall right here." But Grace was already limping toward the cottonwoods, using the stick to hook branches she couldn't bend to reach. Each piece she dragged back to the clearing, pulled at her hip like someone was working a hot knife in the joint. 7 branches, 8, enough to show she could earn her keep. Wade had a fire going by the time she'd gathered an armful. He set his blackened coffee pot in the coals, then pulled a cloth bundle from his saddlebag. The smell of bacon grease leaked through old and rancid, but still food. Grace unwrapped her own bundle. 2 biscuits from yesterday's supper at the boarding house, hard as field stones now, but she held them out. Go halves. Wade looked at the biscuits, then at her face. You got anything else? No. He divided his 4 strips of bacon, 2 for each of them. The meat was mostly fat and salt, gone gray at the edges. They ate in silence, washing down the dry food with coffee that tasted like burnt leather soaked in creek water. Grace's stomach cramped around the first real food she'd had since yesterday noon. The fire popped, sending sparks up into the darkening sky. Wade pulled out the deed again, smoothing it against his thigh. He stared at it like a man trying to read sign in poor light. Can't make sense of the legal talk. He held the paper out to her. Grace took the deed, angling it toward the firelight. The government script was cramped and official, full of whereases and therefores that lawyers used to make simple things complicated. Quarter section, she read, tracing her finger under the words. That's 160 acres, southeast quarter of Section 16, Township 12 North, Range 83 West. You win this or steal it? The question came out before she could stop it. Wade's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Won it fair. 3 queens against his 2 pair. Fellow was so eager to lose it. I should have known something was wrong. Water rights included. Grace tapped that line. That's worth more than the land itself out here. But look, she pointed to the date. Transfer was 43 days ago. You've got 17 days to file at the land office, or it reverts. Wade whistled low through his teeth. That explains why he was eager to lose. There's supposed to be a cabin. Says here existing improvements include dwelling and well, if it's still standing. Wade took the deed back, folded it careful like it might crumble. 2 days' ride, according to the fellow. Where exactly are we heading? West. He pointed toward the mountains, purple-black against the last light. Trail gets rough tomorrow. Grace pulled her shawl tighter. The temperature was dropping fast now that the sun was down. October nights having no mercy. Her hip had stiffened from sitting, and she knew morning would bring the kind of pain that made her eyes water. You need help with... Wade started. No. She pulled her blanket from the wagon, shook it out flat on the ground, upwind from the smoke. Every movement pulled at her hip, but she'd learned to move smooth enough that it didn't show much. Wade made his own bed on the opposite side of the fire, maintaining a proper distance that said he understood the rules. Grace lay on her good side, watching the fire die down to coals. Her stomach still cramped from too much food after too long without. Through the cottonwood branches, stars showed thick as spilled salt. That teaching box, Wade said into the darkness. What's in it? Books, slate, and chalk. Some paper. Could you teach someone to read proper? That's what I did for 7 years. I mean someone grown, someone who never learned. Grace turned to look at him across the dying fire. His face was all shadows and angles in the faint light. You asking for yourself? Might be. Then yes, if that someone was willing to work at it. Wade was quiet for a long moment. Then, might be willing. The second day's travel took them onto a track that barely deserved the name. Buffalo grass grew high enough to brush the wagon's axles, and the ruts from some previous traveler had worn deep enough to catch the wheels every few yards. Wade walked beside the mare now, guiding her through the worst of it. Rock coming up, he called back. The wagon tilted hard left. Grace's bad hip screamed as she fought to stay seated. Her teaching box slid across the wagon bed, smacking into the side rail with a crack that sounded like breaking wood. Wade looked back. Important. My husband's. Just that. No questions about the husband. No false sympathy. Wade went back to walking. and Grace found herself watching the way he moved economical. No wasted motion, like a man who'd learned to save his strength for when it mattered. They stopped twice to rest the mare. Each time. Grace climbed down to work the stiffness from her leg. The second time. Wade watched her from the corner of his eye while he checked the mare's hooves. "I'm not going to collapse," she said. "Didn't say you would." "You're thinking it." Wade spat tobacco juice into the dust. "I'm thinking that leg must hurt like hell. I'm thinking you haven't complained once. I'm thinking that makes you tougher than most men I've known." Grace didn't know what to do with that, so she climbed back onto the wagon. The sun was straight overhead when Wade stopped the mare on a rise. There, below them, maybe a quarter-mile off, stood what might generously be called a structure. The logs had gone gray with weather, and the roof sagged in the middle like a broken-backed mule. No glass in the windows, just black squares that stared out at nothing. The chimney rose from one end, stones still standing but tilted sideways like a drunk trying to walk straight. "Ain't much," Wade said. But Grace was already calculating. The foundation was field stone, built up good and proper to keep the floor off wet ground. The logs were decent-sized, not the skinny poles some settlers used, and that chimney, tilted or not, was still standing. "That corner's still sound," she said, pointing with her stick to where the logs fit tight. Wade helped her down from the wagon, his hand steady under her elbow until her feet found solid ground. Her bad leg nearly folded, muscles cramped from 2 days of jarring travel. She leaned hard on her stick and started toward the cabin. The door hung on one leather hinge, scraping the dirt when Wade pushed it open. The smell rolled out pack rat droppings, molded wood, something dead in the walls. Grace covered her nose with her sleeve and stepped inside. Light fell through the broken roof in solid bars, showing everything clear as day. The floor was packed dirt, hard as stone good, because wood floors rotted fast in Wyoming weather. The fireplace was full of twigs and small bones, probably from owls roosting. But when she looked up the chimney, she could see a patch of sky. "Still draws air," she said. Wade kicked at a pile of rotted shingles. "Whole roof needs replacing. Just the center section." Grace pointed to the edges where the roof boards were gray but solid. Water pooled in the middle, rotted through. Edges stayed dry. "How do you figure that?" "My father was a carpenter before he took sick. I helped him figure jobs." Wade was running his hands along the corner logs now, checking the chinking. "You know how to calculate lumber, how much we'd need. I can figure it. Can you cut straight?" "I can learn." They worked through the cabin for the next hour. Grace showed him how to measure using rope lengths, one rope for height, another for width. She drew the cabin's layout in the dirt outside, marking where repairs were needed most. Wade cleared the worst of the debris, piling it outside to burn later. "Windows first," Grace said. "Before snow, then roof." "Windows cost money. You have any? Some? Maybe enough for glass or roof boards. Not both." Grace chewed her lip, working the figures in her head. "Oil paper at the trading post. Cheaper than glass. We paper the windows for winter. Save for glass come spring." The word hung between them like morning mist. Grace straightened her spine, ignoring the pull in her hip. "You need someone who can read and figure." "I need walls and a roof. That's a business arrangement. Mr. Morgan, nothing improper about it." "Should be written down then. Legal-like." Grace pulled her small notebook from her pocket. The one with her lesson plans from 3 years ago. The pages had yellowed, but most were still blank. She found a clean page and began writing in her careful teacher's hand. Agreement between Wade Morgan and Grace Thornton. Mr. Morgan provides labor and materials for repair of cabin on Section 16, Township 12 North, Range 83 West. Mrs. Thornton provides planning, calculation, and instruction in reading and writing. Partnership to last through winter of 1882 to 83, terms to be renegotiated come spring. Signed this 15th day of October, 1882. She looked up. Anything else? Wade studied the paper like it might bite him. Separate sleeping arrangements? Goes without saying. Say it anyway. Grace added the line, her face hot despite the October cold. When she finished, she signed her name and held out the pencil. Your mark. Wade took the pencil, holding it awkward between his fingers like a man might hold a snake. He made an X, then stopped. That's not enough, is it? For legal, you could write your initials, W and M. Show me. Grace drew the letters in the dirt. Wade studied them, his lips moving slightly as he traced their shape with his finger. Then he took the pencil again, pressed it to paper. The W came out backwards. The M looked more like two mountains pushed together. But they were letters, not just marks. Legal enough, he asked. Legal enough. They hauled her trunk inside first, setting it in the sound corner where the roof still held. Wade brought in his bedroll and saddlebags, placing them on the opposite side of the room. The cabin felt smaller with their things in it, but also more real, like people might actually live here instead of just surviving. The sun was dropping low by the time Wade got a fire going in the cleared fireplace. Smoke backed up at first, choking them both, then found its way up the chimney. Grace unpacked her one pot and the bag of cornmeal she'd been hoarding. Mush for supper, but hot food at least. They sat on overturned crates Wade had found behind the cabin, eating in the circle of firelight while darkness pressed against the empty window frames. The fire popped, sending shadows dancing across the log walls. Can I ask something? Wade said. Grace tensed. Here would come the questions about her husband, her accident, why a schoolteacher was riding in a wagon with a stranger. That teaching box, what's really in it? She looked at him across the fire. I told you. Books and... No, I mean, what's it worth to you? You looked ready to fight when it slid in the wagon. Grace set down her bowl, went to the corner where the box sat. She opened it careful, and the smell rose up chalk dust and old paper and something else, something that always made her throat tight. She pulled out the primer, its cover worn soft at the corners. This was my husband's, from when he was a boy. She opened to the last page where, in a child's careful hand, someone had written, Property of Thomas J. Thornton, age 7. Wade stood, came closer to look. He kept it all those years, said it was the first thing he ever owned that was truly his. And now it's yours. Now it's mine. She closed the book, placed it back in the box. Tomorrow we start lessons. First light. You mean that you'll teach me? I mean it. Wade went back to the fire, added another log. Grace returned to her corner, arranging her blanket on the hard ground. Through the empty window frame, something moved in the darkness, a shadow padding past on quiet feet. Wade, she whispered. Something's outside. Wade's hand found his Colt before Grace finished her whisper. He moved to the window frame, keeping his body to one side. gun barrel catching firelight. The padding sound came again, 4 feet. Not 2. A low whine, almost too soft to hear. Just a coyote, Wade said, easing the hammer down. Maybe wolf. They'll stay clear of the fire. But Grace was already adding wood, building the flames higher. Her hands shook not much, but enough for Wade to notice. He came back to the fire, set the Colt within reach. They won't come in. Too scared of people. I know. But she kept feeding the fire until it roared. November came in hard that year. I remember Grace telling me, ice on the water bucket every morning, frost painting the inside walls white where the chinking had gaps. That first morning of lessons. Wade's breath came out in clouds while he sat at the makeshift table, 2 boards across stacked crates. Grace had drawn letters in the dirt first, but the ground was too cold, too hard. So she took charcoal from the fire edge, wrote on the smooth board they'd found behind the cabin Wade. That's your name, she said. I know that much. His voice came out rough, defensive. Do you know what sound each letter makes? Silence stretched between them. Wade's jaw worked like he was chewing on words he wouldn't speak. Grace pursed her lips and made the sound, "Wah," like wind starting, Wade. Wade watched her mouth, then tried to copy. No sound at first, just air. Then a whisper. Wade. Good. Now this one. She pointed to the A. Makes the sound I, like in hey or day. For the next hour, she broke his name into pieces, had him sound each letter, trace them with his finger on the board. His hands were too big for the charcoal, kept breaking it. The 3rd time it crumbled in his grip. He threw the pieces down. This is foolish. I'm too old. You're what? 35, 34. I taught a man of 60 once, learned to read so he could study the Bible before he died. Grace picked up a new piece of charcoal, held it out. Hold it lighter, like you're holding a bird firm enough it won't fly off. Gentle enough you won't crush it. Wade took the charcoal, adjusted his grip. This time when he wrote the W, it came out clear, backwards, but clear. Letters are like people, Grace said. They face the direction they're walking. Most walk to the right. Who told you that? My father. He was left-handed, kept writing backwards until Mama figured out that trick. Wade tried again. This time the W faced right. The A came easier. By the time he got to the E, his hand had steadied. Why's the E silent? He asked, staring at his name. English is contrary that way. Lots of letters that don't speak up. Like people. Grace looked at him sharp, but he was focused on the board, tracing his name over and over with his finger like it might disappear if he stopped touching it. His stomach growled loud enough to hear across the cabin. They'd been at it since first light, nothing but chicory coffee between them. Grace stood to start breakfast cornmeal mush again, and her bad leg gave out. She grabbed the table edge, sent the board sliding. Wade was around the table before she could blink, his hand under her elbow. Not grabbing, just there. I'm fine, I know. But he didn't move his hand. Grace tested her weight. The leg held, though it felt like someone was driving railroad spikes through her hip. She took a step. Wade moved with her, that light support never changing. How'd it happen? He asked. Most people asked right off, hungry for the story. Wade had waited 4 days. Wagon accident, 3 years ago come January. Your husband, dead before he hit the ground, skull cracked on a rock when we overturned. The words came out flat. Practiced. I was pinned under the wagon box. Leg got twisted wrong trying to pull free. They said I was lucky it didn't need cutting off. Wade's hand tightened just a hair on her elbow. Lucky. The word came out bitter as alkali water. Grace looked at him sideways. You don't think so? I think folks use that word lucky when they don't want to think too hard about how bad things really were. They'd reached the fire. Grace lowered herself onto a crate. Relief flooding through her when the weight came off her hip. Wade poured coffee. Set it where she could reach easy. You taught school, he asked. 7 years. Started when I was 17. They fired you for the leg. Fired me for being a widow. Said I couldn't maintain discipline without a husband's authority behind me. The limp just gave them an excuse that sounded Christian. Wade stirred the cornmeal mush, not looking at her. My ma died birthing my sister. I was 7. Pa held on about 6 months, then put us out to work and disappeared. Mary died of fever when she was 4. I was 9. The words came steady, like he was reading a supply list. Grace recognized that tone the way you told the worst things, careful and flat, so they couldn't cut you again. Where'd you go? After wherever there was work. Cattle drives mostly. Railroad for a spell. Learned everything except reading. He pulled something from his coat pocket. A harmonica, tarnished black with age, one end dented. This was Pa's. Only thing he left that was worth keeping. He put it to his lips, tested a few notes. The sound was reedy but true. Then he played a melody, slow and mournful. Grace knew it right off Barbara Allen. Her mother had sung it doing wash, her grandmother before that. Without thinking, she began to hum along. Wade stopped playing. You know it. Everybody knows that one. Sing it! I don't sing anymore. Neither do I. But he started playing again. The melody circled around, filling the cold cabin with something warm. On the 3rd time through, Grace found herself singing. Soft and rough. 'Twas in the merry month of May, when green buds all were swelling. Sweet William on his deathbed lay for love of Barbara Allen. Her voice cracked on the high notes. She stopped. But Wade kept playing, so she picked up again. She walked out in the green, green fields. She heard his death bell knelling, and every stroke it seemed to say, Hard-hearted Barbara Allen. When they finished, the silence felt different, warmer somehow, like the cabin had decided they belonged there. Been 3 years since I sang anything, Grace said. Been longer than that for me. Wade put the harmonica away. We should work on the roof. Snow's coming. But he didn't move, and neither did she. They sat there by the fire, the November wind finding every gap in the walls, making the flames dance sideways. I want to learn it all, Wade said sudden-like. Not just my name, everything. Reading, writing, figuring numbers. That's months of work. Years. Maybe. I got time. He looked at her straight on. Question is, do you, Grace thought about her 70 cents, about winter coming, about the alternative going back to Willow Creek to beg for work that didn't exist. I got time? Wade nodded and stood. Tomorrow, then, more letters. Every morning, but first, she picked up the charcoal, wrote on the board, Morgan. That's my last name. That's 6 more letters you need to learn. M-O-R-G-A-N. She sounded them out slow. You already know the A. Same sound as in Wade. Wade studied the letters like they were a map to buried gold. The M looks like mountains. That's one way to remember it. He traced the letters with his finger, lips moving silent as he practiced the sounds. When he looked up, something had changed in his face. Younger, somehow, like years of hard living had lifted for just a moment. My whole name, he said, wonder creeping into his voice. I can write my whole name. That night, after they'd eaten their mush and banked the fire, Grace heard him practicing in his corner, the scratch of charcoal on wood, the soft whisper of him sounding out letters. She lay on her side, her bad leg throbbing from the cold, and listened to Wade Morgan learn to write himself into existence. She'd just started to drift when she heard it different from last night's padding feet. This was deliberate, human. The door latch rattled once, testing. Wade was already moving, silent as smoke. He pressed his finger to his lips, pointed for her to stay down. The latch rattled again. Then came a voice, young and scared. Please, anybody in there? My paws hurt bad. Wade had the door open before Grace could speak. A boy stood there, maybe 12 years old, shaking hard enough to rattle his teeth. Blood covered his hands, not his own, by the look of it. Where's your pa? Wade asked. Down the trail, wagon tipped. He's pinned under. The boy's voice broke. Please. Wade grabbed his coat, checked his Colt. Grace, keep the fire high. Boy, show me. They disappeared into the darkness. Grace built up the fire, set water to boil, tore strips from her last good petticoat. The boy's father turned out to be Tom Hendricks from 2 miles north. A good man with a wife and 3 boys. Wade and the oldest boy carried him in, his left leg bent wrong below the knee. Just a break. Tom gasped through gritted teeth. Clean! I think... Grace felt along the bone while Wade held him steady. The shin had snapped, but hadn't pushed through skin. She'd seen her mother set worse. They splinted it with pine branches and cloth strips, Tom biting down on a piece of leather when they pulled it straight. The Hendricks family stayed 2 days, sleeping in their wagon outside. Tom's wife Sarah brought cornbread and dried apples, payment for the doctoring. Before they left, Tom pulled Wade aside. Hendricks Sawmill, 5 miles south. Tell him I sent you. He's got window glass. Trades for labor? Wade left the next morning, promising to be back in 4 days. Grace watched him disappear into the tree line, then set about making the cabin ready for windows. She chinked every gap she could reach, stuffing rags and mud into cracks where wind whistled through. Her hip screamed with every movement, but windows meant being warm, meant surviving winter. The 3rd night alone. She heard wolves, not coyotes, wolves, their howls deeper, closer. She kept the fire roaring. Thomas's primer clutched in her hands like a talisman. Funny how a book could feel like protection. But it did. Proof that civilization existed. That she wasn't just another animal trying to survive winter. The 4th dawn brought wagon wheels grinding over frozen ground. Grace pushed herself up, grabbed her stick. Through the empty window frame, she saw Wade climbing down from a borrowed wagon, moving like every joint hurt. He didn't come to the cabin first. Started unloading something from the wagon bed, lifting careful as if handling eggs. Long, flat packages wrapped in old quilts. Grace's breath caught. Glass. Actual window glass. She met him at the door, saw his hands up close. 3 days at the sawmill had torn them raw. Blood had dried black under his fingernails, and his palms looked like fresh meat where the lumber had ripped through whatever calluses he'd had. "Hedrick drives a hard bargain," Wade said, not meeting her eyes. But he had glass. Traded 3 days' work for 4 panes. 4 panes. Enough for both window openings. Grace watched him unwrap the first piece, morning light catching on the pristine surface. No cracks, no bubbles. Clear as water, clear as hope. "Your hands need tending. After, snow's coming, can smell it." He was right. That metal taste in the air that meant serious weather. But Grace was already heading for her trunk, pulling out what was left of her petticoats. She'd been saving the soft cotton one. But Wade's hands needed it more than her modesty did. She tore it into strips while he measured the window frame with a piece of string. His movements were precise, despite his ruined hands, each adjustment careful and considered. When he had to grip the glass, she saw his jaw clench, but his hands stayed steady. "Sit," Grace said when he had the first pane fitted. "2 more to go. Sit, or I'll take your hammer and do it myself." That got him. He sat on the crate, held out his hands. Grace took the right one first, turned it palm up. The skin was gone in places, raw flesh weeping clear fluid. Splinters were embedded deep in the meat of his thumb. She worked them out with her sewing needle, Wade breathing steady through his nose. When she poured the carbolic acid over the wounds, his whole body went rigid, but he didn't pull away, didn't make a sound. "Hedrick's daughter was there," he said while she wrapped his hand. "Little thing, maybe 7 years old, kept watching me work. That's so. She knew her letters, saw her writing in the dirt with a stick. He stopped, jaw working. I asked her to show me, the letters. Wanted to practice while I was gone." Grace started on his left hand, gentler now. This one was worse, a deep gash across the palm where he must have grabbed something wrong. She laughed when I got them backwards, but then she showed me a trick. Said letters are like people they face the way they're walking. Most walk to the right. That's clever. Worked better than anything I tried on my own. He pulled a folded paper from his shirt pocket. "Practiced on this." The paper was the back of a shipping invoice from the sawmill, covered in letters. Hundreds of them, weighed over and over. Then Morgan, then other words she must have mentioned. Cabin, window, Grace, her name, written 20 times in increasingly steady hand. "You learned all this in 3 days. Couldn't sleep much. Sawmill bunks had lice. Figured I might as well use the time." Grace traced one of the Graces with her finger. The letters were still too large, but they were right. All facing the correct way. This is months of progress in 3 days. Had a good teacher. She looked up, found him watching her, those gray eyes steady on her face, seeing her in a way that made her chest feel too tight for breathing. She turned back to the bandaging, wrapping the last strip firm. "Windows need doing," she said. Wade stood, flexed both hands despite what must have been considerable pain. "You got that spare dress, the blue one." "What for?" "Windows need curtains. Keep folks from looking in." "What folks? We're 5 miles from anybody." "Still." He went back to the glass, started on the second pane. "Place should look like a home." Grace pulled out the blue calico, the better of her 2 spares, The fabric was still good, just faded from too much washing and sun. She spread it on her trunk, started picking out the seams with her needle. Each stitch she pulled revealed the ghost of the original color. Darker blue, where the thread had protected it from fading. Wade had all 4 panes fitted by late afternoon. The glass caught the light, threw rectangles of brightness across the dirt floor. For the first time since the accident, Grace stood in a room with windows that actually kept the weather out. She pressed her palm against one pane, felt the cold through it, but no wind, just the solid barrier of glass between her and winter. 3 years, she said, quiet enough that Wade might not have heard. 3 years since I lived behind proper windows. Wade came up beside her, not touching but close enough she could feel the warmth from his body. Now you got them again. She'd cut and hemmed the curtains while he worked, adding simple decorative stitching along the bottom, nothing fancy, just a pattern of crosses her mother had taught her. Wade strung rope across the window frames while she threaded the curtains on. The blue fabric softened the harsh winter light, gave the cabin a warmth it hadn't possessed before, made it look like a place where people lived, not just survived. That night the blizzard hit. Wind screamed around the corners of the cabin, drove snow horizontal past the windows, but the glass held. The curtains barely stirred. The fire's warmth stayed inside instead of being sucked out through empty frames. Grace lay on her side of the cabin, listening to the storm rage. On the other side of the fire, she could hear Wade working with charcoal on his practice board, scratching out letters and words. The scratch pause of him sounding things out had become familiar as her own breathing. Grace. His voice came quiet under the wind's howl. Yes, I want to write something, but I don't know all the words. She pushed herself up, reached for her stick, made her way to where he sat by the fire. He'd written, "The snow is coming." All the letters faced the right way. His spelling was perfect. "That's right," she said. "What else do you want to write?" Wade stared at the fire for a long moment. The word for when you're not scared of something that should scare you, because you're not alone facing it. Grace sat down beside him, careful to maintain proper distance. "Ready? The word is ready. How do you spell it?" She took the charcoal, wrote R-E-A-D-Y. Wade copied it below his first sentence. "The snow is coming. I am ready." "There's more," he said, "but I don't have the words yet." Outside, something hit the wall hard enough to shake dust from the rafters. A tree branch, probably, torn loose by wind. Wade added wood to the fire, building it higher. "Thank you," he said, not looking at her. "For the teaching, for tending my hands, for..." He stopped, cleared his throat. "For staying. Where else would I go?" "Plenty of places. Back to Willow Creek, to some relative somewhere." "No." The word came out harder than she meant. "No relatives who'd have me? No place in Willow Creek. This is..." She gestured at the cabin. "The windows, the fire. This is what I have." "What we have," Wade corrected. "Partnership. Remember, partnership. Such a careful word for whatever this was becoming." Grace stood, made her way back to her corner, but sleep wouldn't come. The storm raged on, and she found herself thinking about Wade's question, the word for not being scared because you weren't alone. Ready was close, but not quite right. There was another word, one she wasn't ready to think, much less speak. She'd just started to drift when she heard it over the storm, A sound that didn't belong. Not wind, not snow. Something scratching at the door, deliberate and steady. Then the whimpering started. High and desperate. Wade was already up, hand on his Colt. What is that? The scratching came again. Then a sound that made Grace's chest tight, the broken keen of an animal in pain. "Something's hurt," she said. "Let it in." Wade pulled the door open an inch. Wind drove snow through the gap. But something else pushed through black fur matted with ice. A body that collapsed just inside the threshold. A dog. Ribs showing through its coat like fence slats. Ice crystals thick on its muzzle. Its left front paw was caught in a rusted trap. The metal teeth sunk deep into flesh that had gone black around the edges. Blood had frozen in streaks down to the toes. "Poor thing's been dragging that trap for days," Wade said. He knelt beside the animal, keeping his movements slow. The dog lifted its head, showed yellowed teeth, but was too weak for more than a warning growl. Grace lowered herself down, gripping the doorframe. The trap was an old beaver trap, its spring mechanism crusted with rust and blood. "Hold its head. I'll work the trap." "Your hands aren't strong enough." "Then show me how." Wade positioned her fingers on the release springs. "Press here and here. Same time. Hard as you can." Grace put her weight behind it. Leaning forward until her arms shook, the springs gave just enough. Wade pulled the paw free, and the dog whimpered once, then went limp. "Dead?" Grace asked. "No, passed out." Wade carried the dog to the fire, laid it on his own blanket, in the firelight. The damage showed clear. Flesh torn down to bone. The paw hanging at an angle that said tendons were cut. "Needs to come off," Wade said. "Let me look." Grace ran her fingers along the leg above the trap marks. The bones were intact there, solid under the matted fur. "The paw's ruined, but we can save the leg. It'll heal. Three-legged dog won't survive out here. Then it won't go back out there." Wade looked at her across the dog's body. "We barely got food for ourselves." "We'll manage." She got her medicine box, the carbolic acid she'd been saving. The dog stayed unconscious while she cleaned the wounds, picking out rust and dirt. When she wrapped the leg tight with strips of cloth, the animal's eyes opened brown, almost human in their pain. "Easy now," Grace murmured, the same tone her mother had used with scared children. "You're safe." The dog's tail twitched, just once, but enough. December came in bitter that year. Now, you young folks with your central heating might not understand what I mean by bitter. I mean the kind of cold that made the cabin logs pop like gunshots in the night. The kind that froze your breath to your blanket while you slept. Wade called the dog Trap, which Grace thought was morbid, but the name stuck. By the second week of December, Trap could hobble around on 3 legs, the fourth still wrapped tight. The dog slept between them now. Its body heat one more defense against the freeze. Christmas Eve morning, Wade went out for firewood while Grace worked on her surprise. She'd been collecting flour sacks for weeks, washing them in snowmelt until the printed words faded to shadows. Had enough fabric now for a shirt, if she was careful with the cutting. Her fingers were stiff with cold, made clumsy by the chill that never quite left the cabin even with the fire roaring. She pricked herself bloody getting the collar to sit right, left red dots on the white fabric that she hoped would wash out. She heard Wade's boots stomping snow off on the porch. quickly bundled the shirt into her trunk. He came in carrying split pine and something else wrapped in his coat. "Don't look," he said, heading for his corner. Grace turned to the fire, started their Christmas Eve supper Rabbit Wade had snared that morning. Cornmeal from their dwindling supply. Wild onions he'd found under the snow. Not much of a feast, but better than the nothing she'd had last Christmas, alone in a Willow Creek boarding house. "You can look now." 3 wooden spoons lay on the table, not rough-carved things, but smooth and fine, sanded until they felt like silk. 1 long-handled for the stew pot, 2 shorter for eating. The smallest one had a design carved into the handle, a simple flower, 5 petals around a center dot. "When did you? Evenings while you were teaching me letters. Helps me think better, keeping my hands busy." Grace picked up the smallest spoon, ran her thumb along the flower. Such a small thing, but carved with such care. "They're beautiful. They're practical. Our tin spoons are wore through." But his ears had gone red the way they did when he was pleased, and he wouldn't meet her eyes. Grace pulled out the shirt, shook it out so he could see. "Merry Christmas, Wade." He stared at it like she'd handed him gold, reached out, touched the fabric with 1 finger. "You made this from flour sacks. It's not proper cloth. It's better than anything I ever owned." He held it up against his chest, checking the fit. "How'd you know the size? Measured your old shirt while you were sleeping." Wade unbuttoned his worn flannel right there, not even going to his corner for privacy. Grace turned away, but she could hear the rustle of fabric, his quick intake of breath when the cold hit his bare skin. "How's it look?" She turned back. The flour sack fabric had come out white as fresh snow, making his sun-darkened face and hands look even darker by contrast. The shirt fit perfect across his shoulders, the sleeves just the right length. "Good," she said. "It looks good. First new thing I've worn in 5 years." He ran his hands down the front, feeling the seams. "First thing anybody ever made just for me." They ate their rabbit stew in comfortable silence, Trap getting the bones to gnaw with his good teeth. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The world had gone quiet the way it does when snow covers everything. Muffling sound until you could hear your own heartbeat. After supper, Wade pulled out his harmonica. Played Silent Night, slow and careful. Grace found herself singing along. Her voice stronger now than it had been in November. Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. When they finished, Wade set the harmonica aside. "I should get more wood. Storm might pick up again. There's enough till morning. Better to have too much than run short." He pulled on his coat, the new white shirt bright at the collar and cuffs. Grace watched him go, then settled by the fire with Thomas's primer. Wade could read simple sentences now. The cat sat. "I see the dog," but longer words still confused him. She was drawing out new practice sentences when Trap started whining. The dog stood at the door, hackles raised, a low growl building in its throat. Then Grace heard it a shout, cut short. The sound of something hitting hard. She grabbed her stick, pulled the door open. Snow had started again, thick and heavy. "Wade." No answer. She stepped out into the white blindness. "Wade." A groan, off to her left. She fought through the fresh drifts, her bad leg dragging a furrow behind her. Found him by the woodpile, flat on his back in the snow. His right arm was bent behind him at an angle that made her stomach turn. "Shoulder," he gasped, Out again. She could see where the ice had taken his feet, sending him backward onto the frozen ground, the shoulder he'd hurt as a child. The one that popped out easy, it was completely displaced, pushed forward out of the socket. Can you stand? He tried, got halfway before his knees buckled. Grace caught him with her good side, taking his weight. Her bad leg screamed, threatened to fold, but she locked the knee and held. Lean on me. You can't lean on me or we both freeze. He let her take more of his weight. Each step was agony, her hip feeling like it was tearing apart. Her stick sank too deep in the snow to help. Twice her bad leg gave out completely, dropping them both to their knees. But she hauled them back up. The cabin door looked impossibly far. Snow filled her eyes, her mouth. Wade had gone quiet against her shoulder, and that scared her worse than his groaning. When they finally fell through the doorway, Wade landed on his good side, curled around the dislocated shoulder like protecting it. Grace could see the problem clear as the shoulder pushed forward, making his shirt bunch strange at the neck. She'd watched her father reset a shoulder once, but he'd been a strong man with experience. Her hands were weak from years of only holding chalk. Tell me how, she said. Can't need someone stronger. She looked around the cabin, saw the wall, the table, the angle Wade was lying. I can do it. She helped him sit against the wall, his bad shoulder facing out, positioned herself with her good leg braced against the table leg, her weight ready to shift. Took hold of his arm with both hands, one above the elbow, one at the wrist. On 3, Wade said through clenched teeth. Pull steady, not jerking. Down and out, then rotate. He showed her with his good arm. Grace nodded. Her hands were shaking. She tightened her grip. 1. She braced harder. 2. Set her weight. 3. She pulled with everything she had, using her body weight since her arms weren't strong enough alone. Felt the shoulder move, resist. She leaned harder. And something popped, wet and final. Wade went rigid, then limp as empty clothes. Wade. She lowered him to the floor. His face had gone gray-white, sweat beading despite the cold. Wade. His eyes fluttered open, focused on nothing. Grace. I'm here. Can't move my arm. It's back in place. You need to keep it still. She tore more strips from her dwindling cloth supply, fashioned a sling to hold the arm against his chest. Wade mumbled something, turned his head away. The fever started near midnight. Wade's skin burned like a stove lid left too long on the fire. Grace bathed his face with snow melt, held his head when the shaking took him. 3 days he drifted in and out, mumbling words she couldn't catch. She spooned water between his cracked lips, kept the fire high, slept sitting up against the wall so she could reach him quick if the fever spiked. The 4th morning, she woke to find him watching her. His eyes were clear for the first time since Christmas Eve. How long? His voice came out rough as tree bark. 4 days. He tried to sit up, winced when the movement pulled at his shoulder. The swelling had gone down some, purple-black fading to green at the edges. The lessons. We need to rest first. But Wade was already reaching for his practice board with his good hand. Show me something new. A word I don't know. Grace pulled herself closer, her hip protesting every movement. She took the charcoal, wrote January. What's that mean? It's the month. The new year came while you were fevered. Wade stared at the word. I missed the new year. You didn't miss anything worth seeing. just more snow. She was teaching him how to sound out the letters when they heard a mule braying outside. Grace went to the window, peered through the frost patterns on the glass. A thin man sat a mule in the yard, his black coat marking him as either undertaker or preacher. "Brother Wade Morgan." The man's voice boomed like he was addressing a full congregation instead of a cabin in the woods. Wade tried to stand, swayed. Grace steadied him with her shoulder. "I'll handle this." But Wade was already moving toward the door, slow but determined. He pulled it open, keeping his injured arm tight against his chest. The preacher, for that's what he was. Grace could tell by the Bible tucked under his arm, looked them over with sharp eyes, took in Wade's sling. Grace standing close enough to catch him if he fell. The single room with 2 bedrolls visible behind them. "Reverend Dawson," the man said, "circuit preacher for the territory. I bring mail from Willow Creek." He pulled 2 letters from his saddlebag, handed one to Wade, who took it awkward with his left hand. The other he held out to Grace. "Mrs. Thornton, still Mrs. I assume." The way he said it made Grace's spine go stiff as a fence post. "Yes." The letter felt heavy in her hands. Her name written in careful copperplate script. The return address, Nebraska. Her stomach dropped to her boots. "I'll water my mule," the preacher said. But his eyes lingered on the cabin's interior, cataloging their arrangement. Grace waited until he was at the creek before opening the letter. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind her brother-in-law James would use to make himself feel important. "Sister, word has reached us of your circumstances. My wife has taken ill and requires care. As you have no proper employment and are living in a manner that brings shame to our family name, you will come at once to tend her. If you refuse, I will make known to all who will listen the improper nature of your current arrangement. A woman who would live unmarried with a man is no better than she should be. You have 1 month to arrive, James Thornton." The words blurred. Grace read them again, then once more, as if they might change. Her hands had started shaking. "What is it?" Wade asked. "Nothing important." She folded the letter, tucked it in her dress pocket. "What's yours say?" Wade held out his letter. He'd managed to tear it open with his teeth. "Can't make it all out. The writing's too fancy." Grace took it, grateful for the distraction. This one was from a woman. The letters looping and decorative. "Dear Mr. Morgan, I am writing to inform you that your uncle Josiah Morgan passed this October last." Uncle Joe. Wade's face went pale. "He's dead, and has left you his homestead in Nebraska, on condition that you arrive to claim it before spring planting. There are debts against the property, but the land is good. Please send word of your intentions. Respectfully, Mrs. Martha Morgan." Wade sat down hard on a crate. "Nebraska. I got family land in Nebraska." "Your aunt, seems like." "Uncle Joe's wife. Never met her. He married after I left." Wade stared at the letter. "How long till spring planting? March, maybe April. My shoulder won't heal right for weeks, maybe months." "Then you'd better start soon as you can travel." Wade looked at her sharp. "You telling me to leave? I'm telling you land's worth something. Family land especially." The preacher came back, stood in the doorway, letting cold air pour in. "I'll be heading to Willow Creek tomorrow. Either of you need anything sent to town?" "No," Grace said quick. "We're fine," Wade added. The preacher's eyes narrowed. "Mrs. Thornton, a word." He stepped outside, waited for her to follow, Grace grabbed her stick, joined him in the yard. The wind cut through her dress like it wasn't there. "You're living in sin," he said flat out. "I'm surviving winter. With a man who's not your husband. With a business partner. We have an agreement. Written and signed." The preacher's mouth twisted. "The appearance of evil is as damning as the evil itself." "Then I'm already damned." Grace turned back toward the cabin. "Your brother-in-law, James Thornton. He's a respected man in Nebraska. His word carries weight." Grace stopped. "You know James?" "We correspond. He's concerned about your spiritual welfare. He's concerned about free labor to nurse his wife." The words came out bitter as alkali water. "Good day, Reverend." She went back inside, shut the door firm. Wade was still staring at his letter. 2 months to get to Nebraska," he said. 3 with this shoulder. Then you'd best start healing." But Grace was already pulling out her trunk, laying out her few possessions. The blue curtain material caught her eye. She'd have to leave that. It was part of the cabin now. Her teaching box. Though, that would come. And the clothes. What little she had. "What are you doing?" Wade asked. "Organizing? Spring will come fast." "It's January." She kept folding. Her movements sharp and quick. The letter in her pocket felt heavy as stone. 1 month. James had written, 1 month before he ruined what little reputation she had left. Wade struggled to his feet, crossed to where she knelt. "Grace, what did that letter say? Family business. What kind of family business?" She stood too quick, her bad leg buckling. Wade caught her with his good arm, held her steady. This close, she could see the fever had hollowed him out, left dark circles under his eyes. "The kind that's not your concern. Everything about you is my concern." The words hung between them. Wade's hand was still on her arm, warm through the thin fabric of her dress. Grace pulled away, went to the fire. "You have land in Nebraska." "Family land? That's more than most folks get. I got land here too. Unproved land. That Nebraska homestead is already broke, already producing." Wade came to stand beside her. "You're trying to get rid of me. I'm trying to be practical. No, you're running." He pulled something from his pocket, the practice board where he'd been writing. "Look." In his shaky letters, "Grace makes this house home." "When did you, while you were sleeping, after the fever broke? I've been practicing that sentence for hours." He set the board down, faced her square. "I can barely read. Can't write more than simple words. Got nothing to offer except this half-built cabin and stubbornness. But I'm asking anyway." Grace's chest felt too tight for breathing. "Asking what? Stay, not for the winter, for good, as my wife." The word landed between them like a stone in still water. Grace stared at him, this man with his fevered eyes and bandaged shoulder, offering something she couldn't afford to want. "You don't know what you're saying." "The fever." "No fever now. I know exactly what I'm saying." "Wade." A shout from outside cut her off. Then another, closer, through the window. She saw 3 riders picking their way through the snow. The lead rider sat his horse like he owned the ground beneath it. Grace's blood went cold. She knew that posture, that careful way of holding himself above common folk. "James," she whispered. "My brother-in-law. He's here." Wade's good hand found his Colt, checked it was loaded. "How'd he find you?" "The preacher. They correspond." Through the window, Grace watched James dismount. He wore a wool coat that hadn't seen hard use, boots polished despite the snow. Behind him rode Harold Fenwick from the Willow Creek bank, and Mrs. Hartley's nephew, the one who'd helped throw Grace's belongings in the street. "Stay inside," Wade said, moving toward the door. "No!" Grace grabbed her stick. "He's here for me." They went out together, Wade slightly ahead despite his slung arm. The cold hit like a fist. But Grace stood straight as her bad leg would allow. James had stopped 10 feet from the cabin, studying it like something he might scrape off his boot. "Grace!" Just her name, but he made it sound like an accusation. "James." His eyes took in everything Wade's shoulder, the way they stood together, the single cabin behind them. "I've come to collect you." "I'm not going. You haven't heard my terms." James pulled out a leather folder, extracted papers covered in legal writing. "Mr. Fenwick here holds the note on Thomas's debts. $700, plus 3 years' interest." $700. More money than Grace would see in a lifetime. Her throat went dry as dust. "Thomas is dead," she managed. "His debts died with him. Not according to territorial law. As his widow, you inherited his obligations along with his assets." James smiled, thin and cold. "What assets you didn't already sell? That is." Wade stepped forward. "She's not his widow anymore." James looked at him then. Really looked. Took in the patched clothes, the shoulder injury, the tired lines around his eyes. "And you are her husband, as of 5 minutes ago." The lie came out smooth as good whiskey. Grace felt her heart slam against her ribs, but she kept her face still. James's expression went from smug to confused to angry, all in the space of a heartbeat. "Impossible. The preacher just left. Reverend Dawson performed the ceremony," Wade said. "Legal and binding. Without witnesses, without proper documentation." "We had witnesses." Wade looked past James, toward the tree line. "Didn't we?" Grace followed his gaze, saw nothing but snow and pines, then movement figures emerging from the woods. Tom Hendricks on his horse, his broken leg still splinted but healing. Behind him, his wife Sarah with their baby, Mrs. Chen from the homestead 2 miles north, her eldest son beside her. Old Pete Kowalski, who never left his cabin in winter, riding his ancient mare. More came. The Hendricks boys, walking through the snow. 3 of the Chen children. Other neighbors Grace had helped with teaching or medicine. People she didn't even know had heard about her. "What is this?" James demanded. "Community," Tom Hendricks said, reining up beside them. His voice carried the authority of a man who'd worked his own land for 20 years. "Heard there might be trouble out at the Morgan place." "The Morgan place?" James's face went red. She's... "Mrs. Morgan is our neighbor," Sarah Hendricks said, shifting the baby on her hip. "She helped birth this child when Doc couldn't come. Saved us both." "She taught me to write my own name," Old Pete added. 63 years old, and she gave me letters." Mrs. Chen spoke up, her English careful but clear. "She teaches our children, no charge, just kindness." James turned on Grace. "You're not married. This is a sham." Reverend Wade called toward the trees. "You want to confirm what you just did?" The preacher emerged from behind the cabin where he must have been watering his mule, but his face had changed. Seeing all these people gathered, these were his congregation, scattered across the territory. Their opinion mattered more than James Thornton's money. That is, the preacher cleared his throat. The marriage was performed. Legal and proper. 5 minutes ago. James's voice climbed toward shrill. Without bands, without waiting period. Frontier rules apply here, Mr. Thornton, the preacher said, not quite meeting his eyes. No waiting period required when both parties are willing and of age. You just told me they were living in sin. And now they're not. Wade's voice cut through cold air. Got a problem with that? James pulled himself up straighter. The debt stands $700. Which you got no authority to collect, Fenwick interrupted from his horse. The original note was with Thomas Thornton. Without his personal signature on a transfer, the debt died with him. I said I'd come as witness. I've witnessed. Fenwick was already turning his horse. The bank has no claim here. James stood alone now, his town witnesses ready to flee. The neighbors had formed a loose circle, not threatening, but present, watching, waiting. This isn't over, James said to Grace. I have no family except my husband. The word felt strange in Grace's mouth, but she pushed on. You want to make something public? Go ahead. Tell everyone how you tried to force a crippled widow into servitude. See how that plays in your Christian community. James's jaw worked like he was chewing nails. He looked around the circle of faces, all of them hard as winter ground. When you're starving come spring, we'll be planting our garden, Wade said. On our land, together. James mounted his horse with sharp, angry movements. You've made your choice, Grace. You'll live with the consequences. I've been living with consequences for 3 years. These ones, I chose. He wheeled his horse around hard enough to make it dance, then spurred toward the tree line. Fenwick and the nephew followed quick, snow kicking up behind them. The neighbors stayed. Sarah Hendricks had brought cornbread wrapped in cloth, still warm somehow. Mrs. Chen produced dried apples from her saddlebags. Tom pulled out a flask of something that burned going down but warmed from the inside out. Never did get to kiss your bride, old Pete said to Wade. Grace felt her face go hot. That's not necessary, but Wade was already turning to her, his good hand reaching for hers. He's right. Should seal it proper. He leaned in. And Grace had a moment to think how public this was, how everyone was watching. Then his lips touched hers, gentle as spring rain, and she forgot about the audience, forgot about everything except the warmth of him, the solid presence that said she wasn't alone anymore. When he pulled back, his eyes held a question she couldn't answer yet. Not here. Not with everyone watching. Now then, Tom Hendricks said, practical as always. You two got what you need for winter supplies running low anywhere. The talk turned to practical things, food stores, firewood, plans for spring planting. The women gathered around Grace, offering advice about keeping house, preserving meat, making Wade's favorite foods once she learned what they were. The men talked to Wade about the land, which sections drained best, where to dig a proper well come spring. Nobody mentioned that the marriage had been a lie 5 minutes ago. Maybe they knew. Maybe they didn't care. What mattered was that Grace was one of them now, part of the scattered community that looked after its own. As the sun dropped low, the neighbors began leaving. Each one stopped to shake Wade's hand, kiss Grace's cheek, offer something preserved vegetables, smoked meat, promises of help come planting time. Tom Hendricks was last to go. That brother-in-law might come back, he said quiet to Wade. Let him. We'll be watching. Anyone comes bothering you folks, they'll answer to all of us. He mounted careful, favoring his healing leg. You did right by her. Morgan. She deserves a good man. After they'd all gone, Grace and Wade stood in the yard watching the last light fade behind the mountains. The temperature was dropping fast, but neither moved toward the cabin. "We're married," Grace said, testing the words. "Seems so. The preacher didn't actually. He said he did, in front of witnesses. That makes it legal enough." Grace turned to look at him. "Why did you lie?" "Wasn't a lie. I'd already asked. You just hadn't answered yet. Wade, I know what you're going to say. You can't give me children, the accident saw to that. You can't do heavy work. You think your burden—" He turned to face her full on, his gray eyes steady in the fading light. "You're not burden. You're the reason I want to get up in the morning. You're the reason this place feels like home instead of just shelter." Grace's chest felt too tight. "You barely know me. I know you work through pain every day and don't complain. I know you taught me to read when everyone said I was too old to learn. I know you took in a hurt dog when we barely had food for ourselves." He reached out with his good hand, touched her face, gentle as butterfly wings. "I know I love you." The words hung in the cold air between them. Grace felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking, but breaking open, like ice giving way to spring water. "The Nebraska land," she started, "can rot. I got everything I want right here." Inside the cabin, Trap started barking, not his warning bark, but something else, urgent, demanding. Wade pulled his hand back. "Something's wrong." They went inside quick as they could manage. Trap stood at the window, paws up on the sill, whining high in his throat. Through the glass, barely visible in the last light, a figure on foot stumbled through the snow. A woman, by the shape. She fell, pushed herself up, fell again. This time she didn't get up. Wade grabbed his coat. "Stay here." But Grace was already reaching for her shawl. "She's hurt. I can help." They went out together into the gathering dark. The woman lay face down in the snow, her dress soaked through, ice crystals forming in her dark hair. When Wade turned her over, gentle-like, Grace gasped. Young, maybe 22, pretty despite the blue tinge to her lips, and swollen with child 8 months gone at least. "Please," the woman whispered through chattering teeth. "My baby. Save my baby." Grace felt the woman's belly, found it hard as stone, a contraction, strong and steady. Then she saw the blood, dark against the white snow, spreading from beneath the woman's skirts. The baby was coming wrong. And they were 5 miles from any help. Wade carried the woman inside, laid her on Grace's bedroll close to the fire, in better light. Grace could see the problem clear. The woman's face had gone gray-white, and the blood was coming steady now, soaking through her skirts. "What's your name?" Grace asked, pulling away the wet fabric. "Martha." The woman grabbed Grace's hand, squeezed hard enough to grind bones. "Martha Morgan. I came—" A contraction took her, bending her double. "Morgan." Wade knelt beside them. "You're Uncle Joe's widow." Martha nodded, panting through the pain. "James Thornton said you were here. Said terrible things about—" Her face contorted again. Grace felt Martha's belly when the contraction passed. The baby was sideways, shoulder first instead of head. Without help, both mother and child would die before morning. "How long have the pains been coming?" "Since yesterday dawn." The midwife in town said. Martha's eyes went wide with fear. "Said the baby's turned wrong. Said I should pray." Pray. That's what they told women when there was no hope. Grace had heard those words before, when her mother was birthing her last child, the one that killed her. Wade, build the fire higher, hot water, all we can heat. Grace rolled up her sleeves. Martha, I need to check how the baby's lying. The examination confirmed what Grace feared. The baby's shoulder was wedged against the birth canal, blocking everything. Each contraction pushed the shoulder harder against bone, going nowhere. Can you help her? Wade asked quiet. I'm not a midwife. You helped Sarah Hendricks. That baby was positioned right. This... Grace looked at Martha's frightened face. This needs a doctor. No doctor for 30 miles, Wade said, and she won't make it that far. Martha grabbed Grace's arm. Please, I know what they're saying about you in town, that you're fallen, that you're... She broke off, gasping. But Mrs. Hartley told me different. Said you were good people. Said you helped folks. How'd you get here? Hired a wagon to the Hendricks place. Walked from there when the driver wouldn't come further. Martha's grip tightened. I got nowhere else. Nobody else. The baby's all I have left of Joe. Grace looked at Wade. His face was set, waiting for her decision. She thought about her mother, dying while the midwife shook her head and said, pray. Thought about all the things she'd learned from watching, from reading her father's medical books before she had to sell them. All right, she said, but this is going to hurt worse than anything you've felt. For the next hour, Grace worked between contractions, trying to turn the baby from outside. Her hands weren't strong enough alone. She had to reach inside, find a foot, try to guide the baby around. Martha screamed herself hoarse, then silent, just enduring. It's stuck, Grace finally said. The shoulder's wedged. Wade had been holding Martha upright, letting her lean against him. Now he looked at Grace across Martha's heaving body. What do you need? Stronger hands, different angle. I don't... Grace stopped, picturing her father's anatomy book, the drawings of babies in the womb, the different positions. Wait, the shoulder's stuck because it's pressed down. If we get her up, standing, squatting, let the weight help. Wade and Grace hauled Martha to her feet. She was near unconscious, legs like water. They held her up between them, Grace's bad leg screaming under the extra weight. Now push up on the shoulder, Grace told Wade. From outside, hard. Wade pressed where Grace showed him, while Grace reached inside again, trying to free the trapped shoulder. Martha made a sound like nothing human. Then something shifted. The shoulder popped free, and the baby turned all at once. Now, Grace said, let her down easy. They lowered Martha back to the bedroll. 3 pushes later. The baby slid free in a rush of blood and fluid. A girl, tiny and perfect, and absolutely blue. No breath, no cry, nothing. Grace cleared the baby's mouth, rubbed its chest. Nothing. She turned it over, smacked its back the way she'd seen midwives do. Still nothing. Give her here, Wade said. He took the baby in his good hand, laid her along his forearm face down, tapped her back with 2 fingers, firm but gentle. Once, twice, 3 times. The baby coughed, spit up fluid, and wailed. Martha was crying, reaching for her daughter. Grace put the baby on Martha's chest, checked the afterbirth was coming. Everything that should come out was coming out. The bleeding was slowing. She'll live, Grace said. Both of them. Wade sat down hard on a crate, his face white as fresh paper. His shoulder had started bleeding again through the bandages. Grace went to him, unwrapped the shoulder, saw he'd torn something when they held Martha up. Martha needs you more. But Grace was already cleaning the wound, rebandaging with the last of their cloth strips. Martha's strong. She walked 5 miles in labor through snow. She'll survive. How'd you know what to do? My father had medical books. I read them when I was young. Before, she tied off the bandage. Before we had to sell them. Wade caught her hand before she could pull away. You saved them. We saved them. I couldn't have turned the baby alone. Martha's voice came weak from the bedroll. Thank you, both of you. Grace went to check on her, helped her get the baby latched for feeding. The little girl was pinking up nice, making the small sounds healthy babies make. Why did you come here? Grace asked. Your letter said the Nebraska land. I lied. Martha's eyes filled with tears. There's no land. Joe lost it all gambling before he died. I've got nothing except what's in my bag. Wade came over, moving slow. Then why write? I heard about you from James Thornton. He was crowing all over town about his sister-in-law living in sin with some drifter. Said he was going to bring her back. Make her work for Christian families. Martha's jaw tightened. I knew what that meant. Unpaid labor until you die. So you came to warn us. I came because... Martha stopped, adjusted the baby. My sister worked for a family like that. Good Christians who worked her 18 hours a day, fed her scraps, told her she was lucky to have a roof. She died at 19, worn out. Grace felt something cold settle in her stomach. James would have worked you until you couldn't work anymore, then turned you out. Martha met her eyes straight. I couldn't let that happen to another woman. They were quiet for a moment. Just the fire crackling and the baby making small sucking sounds. You can stay here, Wade said sudden-like, until you're healed up. Martha looked between them. I couldn't impose. You walked 5 miles in a blizzard while birthing to warn us, Grace said. That's not imposing. That's family. The word surprised Grace as much as Martha, but it felt right. This woman who'd risked everything to help strangers, who'd chosen compassion over comfort. Martha stayed through February, healing slow but steady. She was handy with a needle, could make good meals from almost nothing, knew herbs that helped with Grace's pain. The baby they called her Hope grew fat and happy. Passed between the 3 adults like she belonged to all of them by March, when the snow started melting. They'd worked out a system. Martha and Hope would stay in the cabin while Grace and Wade built a second room. Come summer, they'd add more, make it a proper house. Martha could take in sewing. Grace could teach. Wade could work the land. Together, they'd make something that lasted. The first warm day of spring, I remember Grace telling me, Wade took her out to the garden plot. He'd been working it in secret, breaking ground when she thought he was hunting. Had it all marked out with stakes and string, rows straight as her writing on a slate. What's this? She asked. Wade knelt in the fresh-turned earth, pulled out a handful of seeds, not fancy ones from a catalog, but seeds neighbors had shared, each in its own little cloth bag with a label he'd written himself. Beans, corn, squash. Grace Morgan, he said, still kneeling. I can't give you fancy things, can't promise easy living, but I can promise this: every seed we plant together, every harvest, we share, everything we build starts from this ground up. He held out the seeds. Will you make a life with me? Grace looked at him. This man who'd learned to write so he could label seed packets, who'd held up a laboring woman despite his ruined shoulder, who'd taken in a hurt dog and made it family. "We're already married," she said. "No, we're legally bound because we had to be. I'm asking for more than that." He stood, pressed the seeds into her palm. "I'm asking you to choose this. Choose us. Every morning for whatever mornings we got left." Grace looked at the seeds, then at the plot, then at the cabin they'd made into a home. Martha stood in the doorway holding hope, watching with a soft smile. Trapp sat on the porch, his tail thumping the boards. "Yes," Grace said. "I choose us." Wade kissed her then, right there in the garden dirt, not caring that Martha was watching or that their knees were getting muddy. When they pulled apart, Grace saw he'd been crying just a little, just enough to make tracks through the dust on his face. They planted the garden that afternoon. All of them. Martha carried Hope in a sling while she dropped seeds. Wade dug the rows. Grace marked them with signs she'd made, each one labeled in Wade's careful hand and decorated with her small drawings. As the sun set, they sat on the porch Wade had built, looking out over their planted field. Not much, just a quarter-acre of vegetables, but theirs. Worked with their hands, planned with their minds, chosen with their hearts. "Next year we'll plant twice as much," Wade said. "Next year we'll have help," Martha added. "Tom Hendricks's boys want to learn reading. They'll work for lessons." "Next year we'll add another room," Grace said. "For a proper schoolroom." They kept saying "next year" until dark fell complete, planning a future that had seemed impossible just 6 months ago. The spring air smelled like turned earth and possibility. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its evening song. That's how I like to think of them. Sitting on that porch as spring came to the mountains. Wade could write his whole name now, and more besides. Grace's hip still hurt. Would always hurt. But she had Wade's arm to lean on when it got bad. Martha had found a new family after losing everything. Baby Hope had 3 people who loved her, would raise her up strong and educated. They'd all been called dead weight by someone. Worthless. Burden. But together, they'd built something solid as those mountains, lasting as the seasons. They'd made a place where broken things got mended, where learning was valued, where nobody was thrown away just because they couldn't do what others expected. The meadowlark kept singing as stars came out, thick as spilled salt across the Wyoming sky. Grace reached for Wade's hand, and he took it, careful and sure. Martha hummed to the baby. Trapp sighed in dog contentment. Home. They'd made a home. And in that home, they'd found themselves whole, now. Friend. I need to tell you why this story matters to me so deeply. You see, Grace was my great-aunt, though I didn't know her well as a child. But I remember visiting that cabin in Wyoming when I was 7. Seeing the windows Wade had installed with his torn hands, touching the curtains she'd sewn from her spare dress. The porch had been expanded by then, worn smooth by countless children learning their letters. What struck me most wasn't the poverty they'd overcome, but the richness they'd created not in money, but in community. Every neighbor for miles had a story about Grace teaching them to read. Wade helping with their harvest, Martha nursing their sick. They understood something we've forgotten in our modern world, that nobody's really dead weight. Everybody's got something to offer if someone's willing to see it. Wade couldn't read, but he could build. Grace couldn't do heavy labor, but she could teach. Martha came with nothing but brought everything: loyalty, skill, another pair of hands, together. They were more than the sum of their broken parts. Disclaimer. This is a work of fiction inspired by historical Western frontier stories, created solely for entertainment purposes. This story does not condone, encourage, or promote any form of violence or harmful behavior. All characters and events are products of the author's imagination, and any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental.